One of the most common questions people ask when it comes time to do content marketing is how to create a content calendar. So Brian and I are going to give you 4 types of content that you should have in your content calendar, as well as how to actually create one.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Brian.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess, should we first talk about how far out you should plan a content calendar?
Yes, planning.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there's 2 kinds of people, right? There's people who like to plan ahead, far ahead, too far ahead, and then there's people who don't like to plan enough ahead. Mm-hmm. So, I think for those people who really want to plan ahead, a year is okay. You can have goals for a year and know what your topics are for the year. But I think we'd recommend revisiting that every quarter. So you can have some high level goals, and we'll go into those topics, which you'll kind of have established for the year. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, know that this might change.
So let's sort of talk about why even traditionally people think a year is the number, right? People really think a year is the number because traditionally media companies plan their editorial calendars for a year. And that's sort of, my belief is that sort of has bled over into companies doing that. Like they want to plan for the year. And don't get me wrong, I agree. You do need a plan. But the question is this, right? You don't know how things are going to change. So if you do plan for a year, because I believe the cycle, like Nicolette, should be much shorter, right? It should be like quarterly. But if you do plan for a year, which there's nothing wrong with, but understand if you're in January, what you're doing in April, you need to be flexible for April because that may change, or your company may shift in what their goals are. So things may change. So if you do plan for a year, don't try to stick to it hardcore that this is what we're doing in June, even though it's January. I think you need to be very flexible in your approach and be very open-minded to how you're doing content.
So revisiting that quarterly and saying, okay, let's see what we've done, what's coming up, is this still applicable, and what's going on in the industry. And we're kind of going to go into that now, those 4 types of content, and there's some that you'll definitely want to revisit. So the 4 types of content are your SEO related content. Everybody wants keywords. So those are number 1. Then there's your industry trends content. So what's trending, hashtag trending in your industry, whatever that might be, in the universe as a whole, whatever's really industry related.
Yep.
Third thing would be the type of content that is in conjunction with some sort of event. So maybe it's a trade show, maybe you've got webinars planned for the year, maybe there's something going on, nationally every year. Maybe it's voting season, it's voting year, right? There's an election, and that you're planning something for that. So anything around some sort of event in time. Mm-hmm. And then there's that 4th bucket, which is the flexible bucket. Mm-hmm. And that just means go with the flow, because you never know what's going to happen. So you need to be able to bend with the wind. Let's start at the beginning, at the SEO.
Sure. And I think the foundation of your SEO content is you need to understand, your industry well enough where you say, these are the things that people are always looking for, right? And based on who you are, we talk about this all the time, based on who you are, what is the correct content you need to create for that? And once you understand that, and these are the core things, those are going to, sort of keep your, if you look at your website traffic, that's going to keep it like even keel, right? Where, you'll see it slowly increase, but that's going to be your foundational stuff. That's going to keep your website, the content nice. And even it will grow over time, obviously, but what's going to happen is that's what really keeps your, the users on your site. And that's where you get the biggest bulk of users from, because it's usually very basic content and just general search terms.
So that content can be plotted out for the year. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, we know we have, 20 pieces of content around these search terms. I'm sure you've done the research already. If you haven't, call us, but I'm sure you've done the research. And now you can say, okay, January through December, whatever your year is, this is what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Then there's that next piece, which is the industry trending content. So I think we talked about 5G when it came to industry trends.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like 5G, it's coming. It's going to be there, right? But you
It's
just
here. What? It's
here.
here. Where
Yeah,
have you
yeah,
been?
I guess it's here. That's true. It's here. Right? It's gonna even increase. But what when you look at those industry trends, you could plot them out, but you do need to be flexible. Like, say for instance, I mean, I've seen some news where certain people are trying to ban 5G from certain countries and things like that. So what happens if it gets banned and it's no longer a hot topic, which I don't think that's what will happen. But, if that does happen, you have to be flexible enough in that strategy to change directions.
So when it comes to that industry trend stuff, you can kind of look at your calendar at a high level and say, okay, I know 5G is important. I know this topic is important. I know I may want to touch on these topics at certain points throughout the year. These are, kind of the things that we're thinking. But again, when you revisit quarterly, remember to reevaluate that, because maybe that's not the case anymore. And so,
Yeah, and different types of technologies come out and different things become important. So you definitely need to be flexible, and when you're also planning, if you are going to plan long term, you got to also think a little bit ahead of time, like what's coming down the road, and that's what people respect as you as the expert, as your company, you're letting them know what's coming down the road. So sometimes you want to think about content that, or technology that, if we're talking about technology, right, that may not be available for 2 years, because you're starting to talk about that and become that thought leader in that.
And I want to touch on this because right now we're dealing with the coronavirus, right? So all the people who had a year-long calendar, because remember, we only have so many resources available. We only have so much money to create content. We only have so many people to create content. We only have so much time or resources. So those people who plan that out now, as they're shifting, because there's so much that needs to be dealt with around this virus, I'm thinking off the top of my head, in electronics and supply chain, and all of those people who've plotted out their content strategy, and they'll have to, part with certain things that they put on their calendar or their plan for the year.
Think about how many calls we got asking us, hey, can you help us with messaging even around this, right? Because what happens is they didn't expect that, and they actually, a lot of companies didn't even know how to handle it, much less expect that shift in there. And I think it's a very valid point. No one expected this to happen. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that were like, I told you this was going to happen, but most people didn't expect that to happen from an industry perspective, or have the connection to how it would affect their business, right? We talk about, logistics, like no one knew all of China was going to shut down, I mean, it didn't really all shut down, but no one knew, manufacturing would shut down at the halt it did, and cause an issue with some of the supply chain.
The next thing on the list was the event focused content. So, and that's something that, again, you can pretty much put on your calendar. I mean, you're going to this trade show, but you're pretty certain at this point, you're going there this year, the election is coming, whether you like it or not, it's here in November. Like, there's certain things that are staples, they're happening. So you can plan, okay, I know I'm going to create content around this show, and I know I'm going to create some sort of asset around this webinar. So you can plot that out.
I think the biggest thing with that is understanding where the traction happens with that event, and just making sure it's on your calendar in the correct place. And what I mean by that is, Nicolette pointed at the election, but we're way before the election, right? And we're already seeing a lot of news and a lot of media going on, so any event, even if it's a trade show, right? Let's talk about CES. is in January every year, right? But you see a lot of buzz going on, and you see the search terms being, things being searched for around CES way before that. So it comes to this, it starts, say, and you got to do the research, right? Or like Nicolette said, call us and we'll help you with it. But you got to look to see where it starts trending to be at that sort of apex, because then it's going to trend down on the other side. And all events are like that. We have a few videos on it. So, go through the video archive, and you could look at event-based research and see how it works. But what happens is you need to plan that on your editorial calendar. So even though something's in January, you may need to start planning your writing and pushing that out on your editorial calendar in, say, October or November.
And there's that flexible bucket, which I guess you could put coronavirus in if we were using that example. But, to that point, it's kind of how much are you going to cover that? How much of your resources are going to be dedicated to whatever this trend thing that's going on. So you mentioned before, what if like 5G was banned, right? So you'd have to shift your resources now to covering that, because that would be such a big thing if that's, what industry you're in. You'd have to shift your resources to that. You'd be pulling away from something else, but you'd also have this flexible bucket where you kind of know, okay, I know these are my standards, but I'm going to leave myself open for whatever other content needs to be covered, or whatever, what if there's someone, a customer who, you're having the same issues with customers and they're asking the same questions. And now all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I should probably write a piece of content about that to address some of those questions, because they're happening all the time. So what is the feedback that you're getting from your sales team? And, once you work with them, you can kind of come up with these additional topics, flexible.
Right. And so, I mean, the point to that is, so have these open spots on your editorial calendar, or making sure you're saving budget for those things that may come up. It's not necessarily that, you go, okay, this is my budget. I got X amount of dollars. I'm plotting it in these, 30 items over the course of the calendar. Understand you may need to hold some of that back, saying, okay, I'm going to have like, a handful of flexible items where I'm going to use the budget for those.
So to recap then, your SEO content, your event related content, that stuff can be plotted out for the year. And then you have your trending, which can be plotted out at a high level. And then a flexible bucket, which can be used where, when needed.
And I think the most important thing to your content calendar is making sure you work with Insomnicat Media on it.
I like that. That's a good point.